Stanford University.
This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development.
Okay. Any questions before we get started today? Who all did one of the infringement analysis assignments? How did that go?
You said here patent before. I was something I wanted to be doing for a while, and it was very interesting when I encountered the patent before this class and when I encountered the patent now. And so there's a lot of related material, and you could actually see where the lawyer very specifically omitted one claim out of like 300 to avoid infringing from another patent. So,
anyone else? We're going to get started today. I rewrote this entire lecture about midnight a couple nights ago, and I haven't looked at it yet. So this will be a little bit of a, we'll see how many typos I have, and see how this goes. It's really difficult to teach strategy. I've talked about this to a couple other professors, like how do you teach it? I think what strategy is being able to take a bunch of experience and be able to take a look at a particular situation and be able to say, all right, this is how I'm going to customize all of this experience into how you guys should move forward. And moving forward in terms of patent prosecution, it might be, well, what do we file on? And when do we file that? And where do we file it? Is it just the United States or is it in multiple countries around the world? And how many patent applications should we file? Is this just one or is this multiple patent applications? How much is this going to cost? Who should we work with? These are some of the questions I'm going to try to answer today. We're going to go through, so I'll have some questions that I asked, in fact, quite a few questions to students. There's 12 on my list here, and I think there's at least 10 questions. Some of these questions and the materials you may not have actually seen before. Try to apply what you have learned so far in the class to the question up there on the board. Isaac? Is Isaac here? Abhishek? Yep. You have a startup. You do. Should you file a patent application on it? And why? Or why not?
If you're sure about the readiness of your technology and you know reasonably the ins and outs of the technology you're pursuing, then it might be a good idea to start with first provisional application to establish a priority date. And if you feel that subsequently you make amendments to the said technology, then you may add additional patent applications during the period of the 1 year after you file.
I think that's perfect in terms of kind of helping us decide kind of when in some of those aspects. But I'm going to try to zero in a little bit more on should. And I talked to someone today who's actually a past Stanford student. He's got a really cool iPhone app. He's not raising money. It's already done. He worked on it with a buddy of his. And they might sell it for free on iTunes. They might sell it for a couple of bucks. They might make $100,000 total off of it. Maybe they make a ton of money. Maybe they make $1 million. But the chances are that they're going to make $100,000 or less. Should he actually file a patent application?
Useful in terms of whatever they might get as a benefit. Then
What are those benefits? How do we evaluate that?
all right, so it could be either possibility of licensing their technology to a company, or possibility of getting money in the form of their own startup or their own product. So if these two possibilities don't seem reachable in the near future, then it might not be a good idea to.
Awesome. Thank you. These are some of the major reasons that I use for filing a patent application as a startup. You want to deter a patent infringement lawsuit from a competitor. Note this doesn't say troll. You can't do anything about that. Increase valuation during an investment or an acquisition. Provide leverage in negotiation with a partner. I reviewed these three things as I was driving up here on 280, or driving down here on 280 with this potential client, and I effectively convinced him not to file a patent application. Because when he's looking at these and when we review these things, this doesn't make sense to him. It doesn't make sense that like any of these aren't the reasons that he would want it. He would want to file a patent application because what he was doing was different, and everyone said he should file a patent application on it. But he had no plans to raise money. If a competitor actually brought a lawsuit, it doesn't matter. Like he doesn't have $3 million in the bank to turn around and countersue with his own patent. And he's not getting into a joint venture development agreement with any large companies. And so while he had a great idea, I actually really like it a lot, and I think it's probably very patentable, I don't think it made any sense for him to actually file a patent application. I could say like, all right, well, raise money and then we could talk. But if that's if he doesn't want to do that, then maybe that doesn't make any sense either. But what I'm trying to say here is that there's a whole slew of people that are great inventors with great inventions that shouldn't actually file patent applications. And you're going to come out of this class being able to point to things and say, you should patent that, you should patent that, and you should patent that. And I took a patent class, and I know that that's patentable, you should file a patent application on it. But that may not necessarily make sense for that particular company or inventor or startup.
To file a system now, let's say somebody else who also doesn't need to file a patent does, and then now this person can't make his product anymore?
So under the first to file, a publication is going to ruin someone else's chance to do that. So if he launches in his particular company and he gets an iPhone app out in spring, that right there, anything that's filed after that point is going to be running up against his publication, his use, his sale. And so keep in mind that first to file doesn't mean anyone could go ahead and do this. The inventor himself still has a grace period, but everyone else is going to, if they didn't get there before someone else published, then they can't actually file a patent application. So this is actually one great way of completely preventing someone else from moving forward with the patent, is to publish. We're going to talk about each of these three things. Christopher Sebald. Christopher. How do you deter a patent infringement lawsuit from a competitor? What would be some of the things that you would want to do to deter someone else from bringing a lawsuit?
You could find out which of their competitors have similar patents or similar technologies and try and partner with them. In the example we read in the text, there was an unknown founder, right? Mm-hmm. And so you could do your research and find out, has everyone who's been involved in that patent received what they ought to receive, and then maybe convince one of them to work on your side. Yeah. So those are two options. You could also just go ahead and file your own patents from the technology.
Probably a little bit more straightforward version.
Yeah.
Sure. So what does that mean, just to file your own? Will one be enough? Do we have to file 100 of these? Like, what does it take?
Which depends on the situation and the technology, I guess. But
what kind of depends aspects? What kind of factors might go into the depends?
It depends on how many patents the other company thinks you're infringing upon, first of all. So if it's only one, then maybe you can counter with one.
Yeah.
So
it depends on kind of like the field of the industry or how prolific people are in actually getting patents. I think that's a great factor. Thanks. So you create this patent portfolio. You have several patent applications. In those particular patent applications, it's not just, hey, let's file a bunch of patent applications. If they could easily be held invalid or attacked for validity issues, then no one's going to be deterred. Those things actually have to be good. And so they're going to need to uphold against this kind of invalidity attack. To do that, you need to have a decent amount of depth. You need to have some details there. You need to have some variations there. You need to have something there that you could fall back on. Effectively, you need to have dependent claims. You also want to minimize infringement avoidance. You don't want them to be able to get around it easily. So you need to be able to do your own kind of design around studies. So how else could you do this if you couldn't do it like this? And using, make sure that you get a decent amount of breadth in those particular claims. What does it mean to have a portfolio? It's been a while since I looked at the statistics, but the last time I did, the chances of survival of a patent application or an issued patent through litigation against an invalidity attack was something around 50-50. And so if you have one patent and there's a 50-50 chance that it's going to be held invalid in court, well, that's a certain amount of deterrent. If you had two patents, and now both of these have a roughly independent 50-50 chance, well, then that's a much better chance that there's going to be that you're going to be able to entrap that particular company, and that deterrence is going to be higher. What if there's 7 there? And what if there was 100? We could do this math and say 0.5 raised to the 15th, that we understand that number. And that's actually kind of the survival rate that this other company is going to escape infringement. These things aren't independent, I get that. But if we could just assume that for a second, then we could turn around and say, look, the bigger the portfolio that is relevant to this other company, the more patents they have to analyze and be able to ensure or to convince themselves that they don't infringe. Is there a question here?
Yeah, so the way that you described this sort of indicates that these patents are overlapping, right? So if a company infringes on one of your patents and you lose the lawsuit, how is another patent going to help you out there? Because the patent is not going to be on the same technology, otherwise it wouldn't have been patentable, right?
Sure, so that's why I'm saying these were loosely independent, right? There's going to be generally in the same area, but if this is something where you had a patent on this particular feature, another patent on the overarching system, another patent on some of the back-end technology, another patent on the front-end technology, and then all of a sudden now you have 5 different patents that this other company has to make sure that they avoid all of those patents. Because any one of them will help deter that patent infringement lawsuit. So if you had 1, that's interesting. But if you have 7, that's a whole different ballgame. And that 7 is going to do a heck of a lot more in the power of deterring than that 1. And so I often kind of group my clients when they come to me in kind of this way of like, all right, well, is this a onesie, twosie type company? We're going to file 1 or 2 patent applications, or are we going to build a substantial patent portfolio? And there's a decent number of our clients that are just filing 1 or 2. And this is mostly on, I guess I'll call it lighter weight technology. This is easier to do. It's more important that they have great user traction, and that there's other aspects of the product that are much more important. A lot of this is around internet and e-commerce and apps. But when you have a much harder patent or technology, you might be thinking a bigger portfolio, and this is where you get file 7 or 20 or 30 or 40, and all of a sudden someone trying to deter, or someone who's thinking about attacking you now has an entire patent portfolio that they need to convince themselves that they don't infringe. And that's a lot harder job. Significantly harder if all they have to do is be entrapped by 1 to be considered an infringement. Gian? How do you increase valuation during an investment? Through a patent portfolio. What do you mean? What does this mean?
Valuation of value.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is one of the reasons that we file patent applications, but what does this even mean? How might you do this?
If you're like investing in a company, and you, I don't know how you can be shown value.
Yes.
So maybe you could hire other patents that competitors have, or
That might actually significantly improve. But this is, tell me why, if you had your own patent portfolio, why would that increase your valuation? They're just pieces of paper. They don't even give you the right to do anything. They just give you the right to exclude others. Why does that increase your valuation?
corner your technology so that you don't feel the one that can produce it and prevent others from making your technology from others.
But these are just pending applications. How does that increase your valuation?
Well, it has potential, and competitors see that, and it intimidates them.
Okay.
So I think there are a couple of ways on top of that. I think that's what you said already is exactly right. In addition, by investing money in the right places, you can create both additional value in the assets that you're acquiring, but then also you can create synergies between those assets and the rest of the business. So either you continue to file a patent, but then also a patent on a technology is only valuable if there's a way to make money on it. So to the extent that you can develop the rest of the business through operations or sales and marketing and create revenues around that, that makes that technology that you own significantly more valuable.
Yeah. Kind of see this as like the shell around something else, or it's at the frosting, or however, whatever metaphor you want to use. But the concept of if you're building something that's valuable, and now you're trying to put a layer of protection on top of that, or a layer of frosting to make it even sweeter, then this is something that it's not alone going to be all that interesting. We don't go to birthday parties and just eat frosting. We've graduated from that phase of our life. This can make something else much sweeter, and this could actually make it, that is the aspect that I'm referring to when I talk about increasing this valuation. There's a couple different ways that we might look at this in terms of, what are we trying to protect? I think the concept of, hey, here's some core technology. This is what we're going to be using for the entire lifespan of this particular company. Some ways to get at this is just kind of asking the questions of what or who are you as a company? Where are you going in terms of this particular mission, and what is the technology that's going to drive and take you there? Typically, technology companies will have this kind of core technology that they could point to, and that the founders just kind of get it, that this is our core technology. This is something that they often pitch to investors, that this is our core technology. It's easy to I think it's relatively easy to spot this. And it's relatively easy to commit to saying, yeah, let's file some patent applications. This is our core technology. This is who we are. This is how every single product that we're going to build is going to be based on this core technology. The interesting thing happens after we're done filing patent applications on the core technology. Because then after a little while, it's all right, well, here's this feature that's on top of this core technology. And this feature feels a little thin. It doesn't feel like it's substantial. It's not the core. But these features are actually some of the things that competitors are going to go after. Because it's these features that you're actually going to be going after in the market and getting a lot of consumers, getting users around these particular features. It's not necessarily your core technology, but some of the features that you're offering. And when your competitors are going to copy, they often won't change their core technology to yours, but they're going to try to go their way to making those particular features. And so that's why it's actually really important to, in addition to the core, to actually think about, here are some main features, and we're going to protect those as well. I could tell you it feels a lot different. When you're sitting around the table saying, what should we patent, the core technology is just like everyone's drawn to that. We know what that is. We know what that feels like. When you stumble upon an interesting feature that a bunch of your users want, it turns out that all right, that we don't really think there's anything, it turns out that our users really like that. But it's just a feature. We're much more than this. I often describe it in terms of this kind of circle or a couple of circles of the core technology and a couple of smaller features that kind of go off on the side. And a patent portfolio might look like this. From a side angle, it might look along the lines of here's the core technology, and here's some of the deeper features, but fairly narrow, that kind of go off on the side of it. And I draw them deeper because they're not necessarily broad. It's a particular feature, but you know a heck of a lot of details about that. And so that's where this kind of depth comes from. Again, this right here, this core is going to feel, you're going to be drawn to this. If you're a technology company, you know what this is, and you're going to patent this. Maybe it's one, maybe there's 3 different things here that you're going to go after. But it's often these little features that what your competitors want to do. And they'll do it a different way. And so it's these that you will also want to protect. I'll just spend a second here on just another strategy. If your competitor is over here, it's also kind of interesting to throw a couple of landmines down right next to your competitors, right outside their door. When you know that you have something interesting, and say you're a startup in the cloud and Salesforce is going to do this, will want this technology someday, but how they're going to do it is a lot different than how you're going to do it. They already have an established technology. They've been around for a while. And when they see you and they're heading in this direction, they're going to have to step right outside their door and head your direction and, hey, look, you've actually now filed a patent application on how one of your competitors is going to do this. Not how you're going to do it, but how one of your competitors. I wouldn't recommend that anywhere close to patent number 1 or patent number 2 that you file, but that might be a very interesting strategy for patent 10 or 20.
The schematic is great, and I can see how it can be very useful, but I can also see how in practice it's very hard to see where you're going. It's even harder to see where your competitor
Right,
is
so this
going.
is probably 3 years in, maybe 4 years in. You know you're well established. You understand who the competitors are that you're starting to eat their lunch, and you understand like that you're going to be ticking these guys off, and they're going to be turning around and trying to imitate you in some way. It's definitely not clear in the beginning days. That's more like a phase 3, phase 4, building the patent portfolio. But those may end up, and they have once or twice, as being the most important things that particular patent portfolio, or the most valuable piece. Now, that's only valuable to one particular company, or against one particular company. But if you know exactly who that competitor is, and you've been able to say, all right, we're going to put something right outside their door. This is how they would do it. And they wouldn't do it the same way we would. They have a different base technology. Yeah.
Seems like that'd be something that people who just leave a company would have a great ability to do because they have a lot of insider knowledge on the workings of that company. Are there, and I imagine there are, ways to protect against that if you're looking at hiring people to protect yourself against the risk of employees tramping on your IP knowledge?
Yeah, so there's a couple different mechanisms of mostly like anti-competitive type of things that like, hey, you can't go work for one of our competitors for the next year. We talked a little bit about this a lecture or two ago. I think it was last lecture. But there's also something interesting in terms of this IP kind of claw that goes after and says, all right, it doesn't matter that you've already left the company. If what you were inventing after you left the company was still an idea that was founded when you were here, then that's still IP that we want and we're going to try to go after. And companies attempt to do that, some more successful than others. It's really based more on their geography than anything else, because it's a state-to-state type of law.
So how often does it occur that you have something patented as a small company and then people are deterred from copying you because they don't want to be sued versus a big company says, oh, well, you're too small to sue us anyway, so we're going to do the same thing and wait till you try to sue us? Like, what actually happens?
So I can't measure how many patent lawsuits were deterred because they didn't happen. I mean, I could guess and say, all right, my clients are infringing these particular companies. These companies know about it. These companies know that they have patents in this space. And so there was a deterrence of that patent infringement lawsuit. That patent infringement lawsuit didn't happen. So I could take a guess, but I can't measure something that just didn't happen. And so that's actually somewhat frustrating for me because I can't show that, right? I can't show that, like, hey, this is how much value we're creating. Large companies are somewhat scared of the small companies suing them, especially that in a competitor space. That there are plenty of law firms, litigation firms that will take on cases on a contingency fee basis. And there's actually private equity firms that will jump in and say, we will fund this litigation because we know that there's a decent amount of money to be made. And so this happens more often on the West Coast than anywhere else in the world, but this does happen. And large companies are scared of that, especially if they're going to be hit with triple damages for willful infringement.
So what you're talking about of the instance where someone didn't want to raise money, but if it's true that they could get a lawyer on contingent basis of whether or not they won, why wouldn't it still be worth it for them to protect their technology with the patent?
It's just they're most likely playing at a different scale. Yeah, maybe this is something that they haven't left their job yet, which this particular person hadn't, and they don't plan to. And so if they were ever sued, that they would most likely say, you're right, sorry. And they would just give it up, and they would say, here, please take the app. I'll sell it to you. You could not take it. Please drop the lawsuit. That would be the most efficient, easiest way out of that situation, rather than, all right, let's fire up the engines. Like, we're going to go after this company. I just don't see that happening. Litigation is such an incredibly long, arduous, emotional ride that still takes a decent amount of money and time that I just don't think someone who isn't dedicating themselves full time to that particular job, I don't think that it's ever going to be worth it for them. So, as you could probably tell, I'm running through kind of how these, the reasons of why to file a patent application, and I'm having people explain, like, how does this actually work? Ram? Yeah. So, how do you provide leverage during negotiation with a partner? So this is a joint development agreement that we're about to sign. We've been negotiating this, with Qualcomm for 3 months. What do we do? How do we maximize this negotiation power that we have? How does this work?
I guess I'm not so sure. So are you actually negotiating with a?
Sure, I'll get some more context. Okay. My small company is going to now start working with Qualcomm. And we've been negotiating that. When we start working together, we're going to co-own everything. But how do so later on, when they decide to just go ahead and now dominate in this particular area, and they don't have to give me any kind of licensing revenue because they co-own it, they don't need me afterwards. And so how do I stay at the table? How do I stay important?
I think first you have to make sure that you're listed as an inventor on the patent of the product that you're co-developing.
Yeah, and that at least gives you some rights to license it, or at least some rights to use it, because now you co-own that. Right. So yes, that would definitely be a great first step.
Also, I think you could investigate your degree of involvement with with developing the product, or and list the claims that you're actually responsible for, maybe.
So again, this is kind of making sure that you're on the patent. What happens before that? I mentioned this just briefly in class. You did a great job, actually. So those answers were awesome. Who could help them out? I mentioned this just really briefly in class. Yeah.
file provisionals on anything that you've developed so far, so that
Why would you do that?
that way they have to keep you around, otherwise they infringe.
How does that work?
Well, if anything you filed previous to the joint development agreement, you own all by yourself, right? And so if what you develop with them utilizes what's in those previous provisional patents, then they either have to license it from you or stay cozy.
They wouldn't have to license it because they would co-own that stuff, right?
Before you enter into the agreement.
It's easier, right? Thanks. Everyone catch that? And so the concept of the way most joint development agreement works, and this isn't necessarily every single one because an agreement can be completely customized to just about any circumstance, but typically the way JDAs work is that there's background IP and then there's what's called foreground, and that foreground is what starts after you sign that joint development agreement, and say everything after this is co-owned. But everything before that is typically owned by that particular startup. And as long as you're now making sure that you file patent applications on what is yours, then they're going to have to come back later on and potentially license it. Now, there may be some terms within that JDA about how that license would work, but most likely the large company is coming to you or agreeing to work with you because of the knowledge that's in your head. And if you don't get that down in the patent, they're going to assume that that knowledge is shared. And that's actually the big key here. Is there a question in the back?
Answered.
Yeah, I have a question regarding co-ownership. So each of the owners then of whatever is developed jointly can license the technology to whoever they want and get as much money from it for themselves alone, right? So two things. First, I'm guessing it would be part of the agreement to say you cannot do that, like don't license that to the competitor. And second, why when people license technology that are co-owned, I mean, do they go to each person individually and try to bring the price down, or
most of the times this wouldn't be in a licensing agreement. Like someone's going to want to make something out of the joint development agreement. You wouldn't typically get two companies together to create some IP that you would turn around and license. I haven't seen that work like that. It's typically getting two companies together to actually make something. And then, but the question is like, who's making that? And then what IP is necessary there? And so this is where several times we kind of saved our clients by filing provisionals at the very right up to the end, right before something was signed. And we were able to later on be able to say, look, you need our technology. That this technology that we came forth together and worked on together, while that is co-owned, it's based on the fundamental technology that we created, that you were excited to work with us for. And that you can't just run off and make this now. You still need us around. And this is something where a lot of startups kind of get caught in this excitement of working with a large company and co-owning something, but really what they're going to do, that large company is just going to make it. And now they can unless you do this. You often know why the large company is coming to you. You know a little bit about them. You know that why they are attracted and where they want to go. So there's a decent amount that you could actually file on what you're planning on doing as opposed to what you've actually started doing. Any other questions on this? Yeah.
In a situation where you did file provisionals before you signed a joint development agreement, does it ever happen that the bigger company still then tries to make it? And then if so, what is the process? Do you then try to sue them?
You wouldn't necessarily have to get that far. And every single time that we've done that, it was quite clear that, hey, you know what our IP is. But maybe you didn't know. You know what our jointly owned IP was, but you might not have known about these provisionals that weren't public knowledge yet. But oftentimes you need to tell your partner in the joint development agreement, like what your IP is and list it. And that's what we did. We sent them an updated appendix the day before we signed the agreement. But there's titles and it's serial numbers. It's not necessarily everything that's inside there.
They know that you actually have that.
They will later on. This discussion usually doesn't happen until a year or two later, when something's going to happen from that joint development agreement. Yeah.
In a negotiation where the small company says, okay, you can have access to all our IP, but we get like 40% of whatever, some percentage of whatever profit that comes out of.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be 40%. But yes, that's exactly right. And so we want to be paid for that. We want to be compensated for that. We want to be able to distribute in these particular channels through you. We want access to your manufacturing because we're going to be making this for a different market. So you could use this as leverage. And that's exactly what I meant by leverage. There's something that startup wants that they're not going to get with just that joint development agreement. Otherwise, they would have been acquired. Like, that would have made more sense. But that startup wants to do something that's a little bit outside that joint development agreement. And so now they could turn around and say, well, we want to have you help us succeed in these other areas. We want you to be able to manufacture it and sell it to us at cost. We want to be able to use your distribution channels. We want to have access to your IP for these particular markets. And so it's not necessarily like putting them over barrel. Like, you're saying, like, look, we have this IP, and now we get to trade, or now we get to do something with it. Any other questions on this? We're going to jump off of the kind of the whys. John Voorhees? Yep. So you co-found a new venture in the payment space. No hardware, just software. Should you file a patent application?
Why? So I think that if you can file something that is going to capture the method for which you're trying, you're accounting for transactions in some unique way, and you could capture that IP. That certainly adds value to the company and could defend you in the future.
A lot of coders don't even like patents.
I'm aware, yeah. There's sort of it's the kind of thing where it's just another element of the business that is important to keep track of your IP.
You have 8 engineers and developers working for you, and they're all adamantly opposed to this. You're the CEO. What do you tell them?
So, very good question.
Honestly, like, this isn't just like a hypothetical. Like, this question is like weekly basis for me.
I think that it's important to frame it in such a way where you're saying that we're trying to do something as a group, and it's going to help us to have some IP because this business depends on our ability to survive in a marketplace, which is inherently unfair. And anything that we can do to help ourselves out, then we're going to get to our goal. And I would frame it in a way that this is an important step to getting us to what we want to achieve,
But
which
software patents are bad, and I don't want to play this game.
I just think that if you ask it another way, say, do you want to go out there and change the world in such a way where our software is solving a problem? The guys we should really be taking on are the evil credit card companies that are totally screwing everybody in the world, and that's who we should be going after. We shouldn't be
trying to make a stand by not filing a patent application and hoping the patents the world will notice. Yes. That's a great answer.
Oh, there you go.
So, the reasons to file in for a software company is no different from a hardware company. That, hey, you want to be able to raise money, you want to be able to have leverage over a partner. This is something. These are the same exact reasons, and it applies in the same exact way to software. Maybe it's actually not as many. So maybe you're filing 2 or 3 instead of 15. But maybe there's a sense of different scale here, but it's still important for the same exact reasons. You often have to fight this cultural battle when Twitter was founded and they started moving forward, they didn't care at all about patents. And when they were decided that, like, wow, you know what? We're a big company now, and we're going to start being sued. And we really don't want to be sued by Yahoo or Facebook or Google, or forced into some kind of acquisition that we don't really want because we don't have our own patents. And so they had this patent shift. I don't represent Twitter. I've represented a couple of clients that have been acquired by them. But when they went through this shift about a year and a half ago by now, it was a big deal. And their culture there was very anti-patents. And so they came up with this clever way of saying, we're not going to be able to, we ensure you, inventors, that your particular patents that you give to us will never be used against other companies in a patent troll-like manner. And they had this invention, they called it IPA, Innovative Patents Agreement, Innovators Patent Agreement, something like that. But it was basically there was a assignment of their rights to Twitter, but then it reverted back to the inventor, or they had to get their approval if that particular patent was going to be used in a lawsuit. A lot of patent attorneys just kind of laughed at it as like kind of cute, or poked holes in it, saying this is how you get around it. But I thought it was actually fairly clever. And I thought it was clever because I've actually seen the same exact thing happen with some of our clients, and when they're trying to say, all right, it's 3 years in, and we had a fairly anti-patent stance that entire time, and now we want to move forward with a patent portfolio, but the 40 engineers that we have love our culture of not filing patents. How do we do this? And so I thought that was a fairly clever way not to change the world with respect to patents or software patents, but actually to change their own culture so that they could convince their own employees that this was what needed to happen. But they had to go through something, effectively inventing a new type of an agreement or a new type of an assignment just to be able to invoke this culture shift. And that's a big deal. Like if you think about how much money was spent and time is spent trying to come up with this, it was because they recognized that shifting the culture was going to be very, very hard. Doing that earlier is a lot easier. I'm biased simply because I know companies that come to me. I don't necessarily know the ones intimately that don't. But the ones that come to me early, it's a lot easier to be able to establish this culture right from the beginning. This is what we're trying to do. The ones that come to me a little bit later and they have to do this cultural shift, I could see how much they struggle with that. One of my clients is Twilio, and I give quarterly lectures there or little seminars there, and the arguments that happen during that are pretty. There's a lot of folks, a lot of coders that are very, very adamant against their in their stance against patents. Alice Wu? Alice. So you conceived of a new invention last month. You're still working at Apple. You plan on quitting your job in a couple of months, raising some money over the summer, and then maybe next fall working on it and trying to perfect it. Prototype it, test it out, see if it works, that kind of thing. When should you file a patent application?
Now.
Why?
Because, first of all, I'm first to file a system, so whoever files first gets the patent first. And throughout that time, you're probably filing a provisional patent application, which will probably not turn into a full application. So you can file, you have a year to file, the next provisional to maybe once you start prototyping, developing more ideas, refine it, broaden it, and after the grace period ends, you can file another one or maybe turn it into a full patent application, but you still have the rights to the idea.
Just to make sure that we're all clear, we can't stack provisional rights and then be able to go back to that first one. So you have to convert a patent application within the 12 months, or it doesn't exist anymore and it doesn't work anymore soon. under a first-to-file system that you were there first because you didn't actually use it. So if you file something, and then it goes abandoned, then you file it again, and then you convert that second provisional, that first one is not going to save your spot in line with respect to a first-to-file system. But also brought up a couple of great points. We are moving to a first-to-file system, and getting filed first is going to matter. And so, great. That helps get a patent, that you were there first, especially in a very, very fast-moving area. In an area where maybe the technology isn't as hard, or you're not going to evolve that technology a whole lot, or it's particularly fast-moving, filing first is going to make a huge difference. On the other hand, making sure that you file a patent application that has a lot of depth, has a lot of details, has the implementation aspects that you have figured out after you've prototyped it and tested it and gone pretty far in the development, that actually helps out a tremendous amount in getting a patent. Because those details are what helps you distinguish your invention from what's been done in the past. And those details don't happen until later. The timing of this is actually really tricky. The question I was trying to structure it in a way where it's actually really hard. You answered quickly, which suggests that maybe you were thinking of all of those factors, maybe not. But there's this aspect of, should you wait a few months to make sure that you'll be on the other side of the prototyping a year after your provisional? I drew this once, probably a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to draw it again. I draw this on nearly every single initial meeting that I have with clients. Now, this is just a super rough technology development curve. The aha moment and how much you learn when you actually prototype it. This thing right here, this delta between these two lines, it's going to depend on the technology, it's going to depend on your development, it's going to depend on a whole slew of things that we're not going to cover right now. Ideally, this is when you file your patent application. Because it's got a ton of details, and these details right here is going to help you distinguish your invention from everything else that's been done before. And ideally, you file 12 months before that point. Because that's going to get you the early filing date. And in a first-to-file system, being the first to file is going to be really important. And so ideally, you understand when this date is, and this is a guess, but you understand when this date is, and you file a provisional application 12 months before that. Yes?
Before we said that you don't have rights to an invention if it's existed previously in public space. What would happen hypothetically if you published, for example, in an online forum, real-time iterations of your invention, just so that you could have continuous rights to whatever iteration you're on?
I think there's going to be some interesting strategies that come out of first to file that are along those lines. Posting on a weekly basis the last sprint in your software development company. That these are the things that we came up with, and these are the things we're doing. Incredible transparency into that company, which might be interesting for some users and some customers, but also pretty interesting in terms of we're publishing first. We may not be filing first, but we're publishing first. And since the United States is a grace period country, we could decide later when we want to actually file. And so we could be tracking, we're publishing these aspects on these dates, keeping a little bit of, keeping a calendar to understand when that window of 12 months grace period is elapsing, and making sure you file at the right time. I think there's going to be some strategies that are identical to that moving forward. Publishing often. And I like the idea of actually the real-time software development, publishing on a weekly or daily, hourly basis. I haven't had enough time to think about all of those because honestly, the rules for first to file are still being figured out. Yeah.
So in the scenario before, you were still working for another company when you came up with that idea, and allegedly that's when you should file a provisional application. What if it turns out that you're making a fantastic company and then the the company you were working for noticed that the date is when
Yeah,
you still
I didn't
working.
mean to put that spin on it, but yeah, you're totally right. You most likely wait till the day after you quit before you file that provisional application. That's what a lot of our clients do. I tell them to wait a week, so it's a little bit more realistic. But again, there's some agreements, there's some IP clauses that anything filed within a year after you quit, they at least have the right to look at, or they get the right to be notified of that, so that they know whether or not that was actually their IP and could argue that. Not all companies have that type of an IP agreement, but I've seen that more and more lately. The concept here that I'm trying to get at, though, is that you don't want to be stuck. I'm going to change the scale of this. You don't want to be stuck filing a provisional here and then being in this very awkward position of 12 months go by. And you haven't prototyped it yet. It's just a great idea that you had. You don't know anything more about it. You don't know the implementation details. The chances of this thing being patentable when you file this as a full patent application are probably close to like 30%. And if you wait till after implementation details, maybe that jumps to 70 or 80%. Obviously, I'm making gross approximations here, but this is based on my experience. The good ideas, even ones that you're going to start a company around, are most likely not patentable. It's the ones that you spend a significant amount of time working on and you learn a heck of a lot about, and you're uncovering problems that no one else has uncovered. Those are the ones, and you're solving those problems. Those are the types of things that are patentable. Any other questions on this stuff? Yeah.
What if you had a sense of your timeline after like a few months? You just file it.
Yep. You don't often think of it, but that's ideal. And so check in on a quarterly basis. Are you going to be able to do something within 12 months? I don't think so. Great, let's file another provisional. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's an extra $125. It's nothing compared to the $5,000 that you dropped on the provisional.
Ever refile the exact same provisional, like just a few months later, just so they can extend their 12-month?
Same exact thing. Yep.
Okay.
So maybe you add to it, maybe you don't. Maybe you had some more ideas and you file another one, but maybe you don't. I do think that under a first-to-file system, we're going to see this type of behavior a lot more, where you're filing multiple provisional applications. And then at some point, you're saying, all right, well, we're feeling good about this. We're now at this point in the technology curve. Let's file a patent application. Let's go back 1 year. Okay, that's that 1 year point. I guess we're not using that provisional or that provisional, but we'll use the other 4 in between.
So the only downside of filing an extra provisional patent
Cost? That's it, right? Okay.
You actually have to add another sentence in your full patent application because now you have another provisional that you need to call out. But yeah, I mean, that's it. Like, should be a no-brainer. But you're often running around doing other things, and this isn't, you've already filed a provisional, everyone's got this mental checklist. It's checked. I don't need to worry about this anymore. No one wants to worry about patents on a quarterly basis. This makes sense. Stephanie. Is Stephanie here? Dai Wu? Hi. So your first market is the United States, but you can envision entering Europe, Japan, possibly even China. You got one patent application on the core technology, but there's a bunch of features that you might file a patent application on. You got a decent budget for IP. Where should you file it? Let's kind of start off with some of the basics. Why would you file in other countries?
just going around the borders and producing it in China. In fact, getting around the patent law in the United States.
So filing in the United States patent application isn't enough to protect it in China. Right. So everyone understands that concept. So the United States patent is going to protect you in the United States, and that's it. China's a big market. There's Europe.
Ideally, you would want to file everywhere, but if you didn't have enough money to do that, you can file like manufacturer patents wherever you were manufacturing design patents, like different parts of the patents.
Awesome. Tell me more a little bit about that. You said manufacturing.
So, for example, Apple, if they were exclusively going to manufacture in China, they could just file the patents there.
But then want a competitor to just manufacture in a different country, like Korea? So what would you recommend?
So, but if the cost structure was like so much more beneficial there, then you would still have the benefit in terms of the business. So they could manufacture in Korea, but if you knew that it was going to cost you like 10 times less to manufacture in China, you just have to protect that market, right?
So we're trying to do some kind of evaluation. This is what I was trying to tease out, some of these factors, and you're nailing them. So, but I want to continue this conversation. So if maybe a country that is manufacturing, because there's some kind of manufacturing benefits, maybe we file some patents there. What if this particular product is a huge hit in Scandinavian countries? It's skis or boots or wooden shoes or something like that. Hats. Thermal, like electric powered hats or something.
You could probably file parts of the features in those countries.
Okay.
Particularly the front end ones, where you're dealing with design and customers.
Awesome. This is one of the hardest questions that our clients face. And it's a really, and one answer is just like, all right, well, wherever it's made, used, or sold, or could be made, used, or sold. Guess how many countries that is? It's a few. And when you're thinking about patent costs, maybe it's on average 20 grand per country, and there's 200 countries that could be making, using, or selling this. That's a heck of a lot of money. You're a little startup. Are you going to spend $4 million like protecting your particular patents all around the world? No. So what if you have, so it's a super low cost medical device. Target areas are India and China. Where do you file a patent application? It'd be nice to file it in India and China. But there are other countries too that you might want to go into after that. Do you file in the United States? Do you even plan on selling it here? Low-cost medical device that's targeted for other developing countries. Do you file in the United States?
That your competitor will do it in the same countries you're interested in, and a competitor, like the market wouldn't be enough for them if they were to make it only in all countries except the US, China, and Europe. So finding those might be enough to prevent the competitor from doing it.
Yeah, so maybe this is an 80-20 type of rule. I use United States, Europe, and China as an almost default foreign strategy. That if this is something where we're going to spend a little bit more money, then maybe we go into Japan, but Japan's awfully expensive patent system. Maybe we go into Korea, maybe we go into Canada, maybe Australia, possibly Brazil. But there's a couple of different countries that, what am I targeting? I'm targeting big markets. That if a competitor wants to go after one of these other markets, fine. Go ahead. We'll concede to that. We want to have the big markets where people are going to be making a lot of money on the sale. This particular product is maybe it's optics. And nearly all the optics countries or companies in the world are centered around Germany, or Germany and Japan. And so let's make sure that we file in Europe and file in Japan. even though Japan's not a huge market for optics, like that might be a great place to protect because that's where the manufacturers are. And so making or using maybe the top 3 countries in both of those kind of categories. In the end, though, this gets really tricky because you have a patent portfolio of, say, 10 patents that you're planning on doing over the next couple of years. Do you take every single one of those in 3 countries? That's awfully expensive. Maybe you pick a couple of them that are targeted more on the manufacturing side for the manufacturing countries, and a couple of them that are targeted more on the feature side for the your sales market countries. You don't often know that you're going to have 10 inventions when you're sitting there trying to make a decision on your first patent application. Do you go into multiple countries? This is often the biggest regret that our clients have. I really wish we would have gone foreign with this particular patent application. This turned out to be our core technology right here. Why didn't we go foreign? Well, we had that choice. I talked to you about it at the time, and you said, we don't have the money. And I said, this is our only chance to do it right here and now. If you tell me next week, it's already too late. We can't do it. Thank God for email, because I could just forward that email thread. These are really hard decisions, because then when they're successful, and that market turns out to be a really big deal, they want protection there. What we often do, though, is say, all right, look, we can't file around the world in every single patent application, especially the first couple. We just don't have enough money then. And so we file in the United States, and then we come up later on with some kind of improvement to the technology, and that improvement, that significant improvement, that's the thing that we take around the world. And by around the world, I mean 3 countries, or 4. 6 at the top, at the most. I mean, I've never filed more than 6. In the 500 or 600 patent applications that I filed, I've never filed more than 6. Europe right now, I could call it a country. It's not. It's a region. There will be at some point a European patent. There is kind of one now, but to litigate with it, you need to register that in particular countries in Europe. It's kind of a mess. You file in Europe, you get a European patent, but it's actually not really a patent. Then you have to turn around and create a French patent out of it, and a German patent out of it, and a Finnish patent out of it, and every single one of those countries that needs to be translated and then approved and then maintained. It gets incredibly expensive. We are moving, however, or Europe is moving to a European patent system where you don't have to do that. I don't know when that's going to happen.
So in a lot of countries, for example, in China, there's a lot of pirated software. So do you see a lot of examples of software companies trying to also patent in China?
So I don't think I did, but I was going to kind of italicize China. Oftentimes when I mention to our clients, let's file in Europe and China, they just kind of laugh. Like, China? Like, do they even have a patent system? And just like, do they respect patents in China? And I'm like, wow, you haven't been paying attention. Let me give you a little history lesson. Let me show you some trend lines. And let me show you how the fact that the Chinese patent system is going to be the dominant patent system in mere years. I mean, the trends are it's crazy. And it's on the books right now to be able to make a much, much stronger patent system in China. And so I just want to make sure that I kind of go back to that, because I think that a lot of people will say, like, China, really? Come on. But if your particular product or method has a decent shelf life, like it's still going to be important 5 years from now, I push particularly hard to file in China.
There is a lot of pirating, so separate from maybe the patent system being strengthened in China, there's still a lot of pirating of software, right?
There's still a lot of pirating of hardware. There's third shifts that happen, and those third shifts are being sold and outside of the typical distribution chain or the approved distribution chain. So, I mean, it's not just software. But yes, software is a particular problem as well. But that might be one reason to do it. What we don't really know right now is like how effective is a US-based company going to be in enforcing Chinese patent rights? That is a fairly decent-sized question mark right now. What I've seen, and at least the trends that I hope that I'm reading correctly, is that in a few years, it's going to be not particularly hard for a US-based company to walk in and say, I have a Chinese-issued patent on this, and here is an infringer, and we want this infringer to stop. That right now isn't easy to do, but I suspect that's going to be much easier in a few years. And if what you're making has a decent shelf life, and it could be sold to the Chinese market, I don't see how that doesn't make sense. Especially since filing a Chinese patent application is about 1/3 the cost of filing a European patent application. Yeah.
Have to be filed in the language of the country?
Most of them.
That then is so apparently there's some language expertise that needs to be involved in patent writing. Do you end up running into a lot of cases where the whole legal negotiation, now you have the translation errors thrown into, is the idea being accurately...
I don't know the translation errors, right? Because they're being translated into Chinese, and I don't really know, I don't speak Chinese, and I can't read Chinese, and so I don't know of the problems that I am creating. And so that is somewhat problematic. So I talk about how important claim language is. And I may have used the example of like heating to 400 degrees Celsius or heating at 400 degrees Celsius. That a $50 million patent infringement lawsuit came down to a prepositional phrase that was 2 letters. And they lost because they picked the wrong 2 letters. And is that going to happen when you translate a patent document that's not easy to read into another language? I guess is yes. I don't have a good answer for, well, what does that mean and what are you doing to minimize that? Other than we use high-quality translators, and it does have to be, that translation has to be approved typically at the office that's accepting it to say that this translation is an accurate translation of this original document. And so there's at least 2 pairs of eyes that are looking at this, if not more. But yes, if a word doesn't translate very well and it has a couple different meanings, yeah, that could cause some serious problems.
A case ended up running into trouble because it was filed when the foreign patent was infringed upon, but the foreign patent, it did not provide the same. There were just conflicts in what was covered and what was not.
This also gets a little tricky in terms of what do you argue, because every single patent office is going to do their own examination. And so you might be arguing one thing in one country and arguing something different in another country. And you might end up arguing something somewhat opposite. And some US-based courts have said, well, that's great, but when you were arguing in Europe, you said that this phrase meant this. Really? Because I didn't even know that German translation meant that, and now I'm saying that it did, and now that translation is being used against me here in the United States to interpret my phrase in the United States patent. Those are some clever patent litigators right there. Is there another question? So this is tricky. I don't have a good answer for you. But yeah, this is a problem.
With patent expertise, I guess.
But then how do you really know that, right?
Yeah, there's some languages that just sound as vague as ours.
Not disagreeing. Yep. But I wouldn't really know.
Does it ever happen that you don't have enough money as a company to file foreign patents, so you decide not to file a patent because you don't want to teach your methods where someone else in another country would be able to use that in their country? Have you seen that?
I've brought that factor up a couple of times where, say, another country was the main market, and let's not file a U.S. patent application, because there's really not much to gain in the United States from filing it other than teaching the world how to do it. And that we don't have the resources to file in these countries where we want to file, and if we file just in the United States and the market is very small, this is actually harking back to my low-cost medical device. We have a couple clients in that area. doing great, super important work, does it make sense to file a U.S. patent? Maybe not. There's been plenty of times where I've persuaded companies not to, for somewhat similar reasons. We're effectively just teaching the world how to do it, and we're not really getting the protection that we want. I don't really see patents as being like a great source of information. I mean, there's 3,000 patents, or 3,000 published applications a week, 5,000 issued patents a week. Like, I don't really know who's like sitting there reading all of them. It just doesn't seem like, at some point when we were issuing 1,000 a year, maybe that made sense to read all of them, because those are probably interesting. But now we're doing 5,000 a week, like, I don't know if that's interesting. So I think oftentimes that the companies view that as a bigger problem than it actually is.
But a competitor can search for you as a company and see all your patents, right?
Yep.
Okay.
If, let's say I did not want to file a patent in China, but I have some product that I want to build, does that also mean I should not manufacture it there as well? So like if I want to manufacture a device in another country, should I file a patent in that country as well?
This actually harks back a little bit to the Apple example, that just because they're filing or they're manufacturing in China doesn't mean necessarily that should be the only place that they're filing patents. The fact that you are filed in a certain area shouldn't necessarily dictate where you should manufacture. And so oftentimes our clients are asking us questions based on, well, we did this with our patent portfolio, should we do this with technology development or head our business in this area? And my general answer is never let the patent attorney dictate where you're going as a company. You know, I could help out and do some guidance in terms of what do I know from my experience, and I could help out in guidance on, well, you'd have this benefit if you did this, but don't make decisions based off of that. If it turns out that you didn't file in China, but it's the best place for you to actually manufacture, then I wouldn't necessarily stop from doing that. Because they could still make it in China regardless of whether you're making it in China. And maybe the question is more along the lines of, I'm concerned about a third shift. You know, someone running the tools later in the night without my authorization, and now without a patent I have nothing that I could do to stop it. I don't want the tooling in that country if I don't have a patent in that country. And so maybe that's a factor.
The price of the Chinese and European patent compared to the U.S. You said Chinese patents are 1/3 that of European ones?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have another slide on that, I might. But just kind of real briefly, this is just the cost at my law firm. Provisionals we charge $5,000 for. Full applications in the United States we charge $16,000, and if it's based off of this application, we charge $6,000 for a PCT, and I'll explain what that is in a second. And then if it's based off a PCT to go into Europe, I believe it's $18,000. And then that doesn't include, so none of this actually includes prosecution. And prosecution is probably around $15,000. In the United States, it's probably around $10,000. In Europe. In China, it's about $6,000 to enter, and then another $10,000 to prosecute. In Japan, it's about $12,000 to enter, and another $10,000 to prosecute. And so you can see how these numbers are going to add up pretty quickly. And this is just 3 countries.
And we take one more time.
So I've written 600. So I have a pretty good handle of what that bell curve looks like. It turns out that the simple ones are actually really hard to write, because you need to work really hard to figure out how it's going to be distinguished from the prior art. That the very complicated ones, you don't even have to worry about the prior art. It's complicated. Go try to find this patent office. And so we found that it's as long as we can quickly jump into the technology and get it, that they all kind of look the same in terms of the effort. And so that's why I feel very comfortable doing. I had a couple of scales of we used to charge more for med device and we used to charge less for simple mechanical inventions. And then it turned out that I felt comfortable going to a flat rate. We just went this year, and this is why I've gotten very little sleep this week. I pushed out a new fee schedule to all of our clients that now incorporates all the government fees and all drawing fees. And so this is a kind of all-in type of number that we charge. This is fairly representative of a cost structure at a big firm. There's smaller firms, you could definitely get something cheaper. Yeah.
Really expensive, but based on the numbers that you just brought up, it doesn't look like it's that much more.
Yeah, but it's just one country, right? It's not a gigantic market compared to some of the other ones. And so oftentimes that, if a lot of times we just do United States, most of the time. And then some of the time we do United States and Europe. And then a little bit of the time we do United States, Europe, and China. And then very infrequently we'll enter Japan. And then the other countries like Korea, Australia, Canada, potentially Brazil, those happen on a very rarely basis. And I represent startups. If you're talking to a large company, they might just have a blanket, like we'd file in 8 countries every single time. They have the budget for it. Yeah.
Working with a local patent firm? Like if you go to Europe, working with a German firm instead of the US one?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Is there any advantage in working with a local attorney?
Yes and no, because you still need to have that. You have this translation problem. You have this, like, what are our goals and what are we trying to accomplish? That German patent attorney is just going to look at really what's happening in the United States to kind of understand where everything is going. I coordinate all of this for our clients, so they don't even have to see this. So it just looks like I'm the one who's doing all of this. I can't file a European patent application. I can't file a Japanese patent application. Japanese patent attorneys and European patent attorneys do. And we coordinate all of that. It's pretty common, I'd say almost standard, for patent law firms to offer that kind of foreign filing through another law firm.
Cheaper and powerful.
We use a Chinese law firm. I mean, I can't do it myself. And so I'm adding some small amount on top of that. Of this 18, I think my law firm sees like $1,500. And that's effectively just to coordinate that and to make sure that they're doing it right and doing what our clients want. And so that 18 isn't going in. And that's a great question. So of the 16, I'd say 90% of it's going to my firm, and of this 18, I'd say 10% of it is. That PCT, let me go back and talk about that fairly quickly. A PCT is kind of like an international provisional. There is no international patent, but the PCT process will help delay things. Our typical timeline, what our clients do is we'll file a provisional application. 1 year later, we'll file in the United States and what's called a PCT. So this is 12 months right here. And then 18 months later, we need to decide where to go with that PCT. And this PCT application, we could go into Europe and China and Japan. I think there's 210 out of 216 countries that recognize the PCT process. So it's effectively everywhere that you want to go. Notably, Taiwan is not on that list. You need to do Taiwan at this point, not at this point. But the beauty of using the PCT process is that you're delaying something by 2.5 years. And what I just told you, which was really expensive foreign filing costs, because you know them, they're over there, you could delay that until later on in the startup. This turns out to be incredibly important. Every single time we do foreign, we do PCT process. Even if you know you're just going into Europe, the PCT is like a $6,000 option to push that cost into the future, a year and a half. And that year and a half can make a big difference in terms of how much can you afford.
Can write our own proposal.
So PCT is based on kind of a patent application. It has to have claims. I wouldn't recommend writing your own patent application, and I wouldn't recommend writing your own PCT. Sorry, so that is a difference. So this application right here is identical to that. It's not related to that. It's identical to the PCT. So this needs to be a full application with claims.
It's the exact same thing.
All government fees that go there.
Okay.
And translation fees. These aren't legal fees. These are mostly government fees and translation fees. Yes, you could file just in English, which is great. Even this $6,000 right here, 5 of that is government fees. So the only thing that's really legal fees in this are these two numbers right here, and then all the prosecution stuff. But everything else is really government fees. Yeah.
So if you were to go to courts in one of the other foreign countries, the date for the filing is actually when you file provisional in the US.
So all those countries recognize that provisional as an earlier priority date. That's why what's so brilliant about this is that you get to push these costs 2.5 years into the future. You're effectively buying a $5,000 option right here with this provisional and a $6,000 option with this PCT. And that by option, I mean to file later. And oftentimes what happens with our clients, that Series A, and that Series B, or that Series Seed, and that Series A, and so they have funding that happens in between these two things. And it works out really nicely. And oftentimes I'll try to time it that way as well. Yes?
In some countries, including China and some European countries, I guess there is a special type of IP, which is like a tiny patent. Is this something that we're looking into?
Yes. Especially, we do a decent amount of hardware work. My specialty is kind of like pretty much anything that has hardware and software in it. But on the more hardware side, filing this tiny patent is much more narrow, but it's effectively preventing the third shift. It's preventing copies. So the protection is a lot more narrow, but the cost and the time to issuance is super low and super fast. I wouldn't say it's super low in terms of cost. I mean, it still costs money, but it's cheaper and it's definitely faster. I haven't used it as much as, I haven't rolled it out as part of like the bigger strategy just yet. We've been just kind of playing around with it here and there. But I suspect that that's going to play a much bigger role in the future. In fact, I don't even really know what to call it other than tiny patent. The concept is that it's more kind of stamped as approved as opposed to being examined. And you're effectively saying, this is what I want, but I really just want to protect just this thing.
Timeline. So if we do a public disclosure before the provisional, that's okay. But before the
No, so it's okay for the United States only.
Yeah.
So if we publicly disclose right here, then we lose our option to PCT and we lose our option to go foreign.
Disclosure after the
Totally
provisional.
fine. If the public disclosure is right here, then all of these countries, all of these patent applications go back to the PCT and then go back to the provisional. As long as your provisional is good, which pretty much every single one in this class can now write a great provisional.
Okay, so we are good after we file the provisional in the U.S. Everywhere in the world.
That's what I teach. I don't really have a good number on how much startups should spend on foreign. But I could tell you just, hey, the number 30% seems to be how much they do. And so this is more just kind of empirical data from my own clients rather than this is ideal. But the ones that have done well, this is about how much they spend. Now, if you think about this, if these patent applications are costing something, roughly equivalent or, somewhat of a, maybe it's a fraction of 1/2 for the U.S., and they're only spending 1/3 of their money on foreign, then they're not taking all of them foreign by any stretch. They're picking and choosing which ones to go. But that happens to be just a number that empirically seems to be working out for a decent number of our clients. Yi Wang. Venkat. Your product's a unique combination of 3 different subsystems, which each have their own unique aspects. How many patent applications should you file?
It kind of depends on how much money you have. But I think it would. I would start with just the 3 aspects individually, and also think of the interaction between the aspects. So there's so many ways to combine it, and also all of them together. If the money is a constraint, then I would think of what combinations are the most important for the functionality. And
what are you weighing when you say most important?
In terms of
what if one functionality seems to be more important to customers, but another functionality seemed to be a little bit more patentable?
I would view it from a use case point, like how relevant it is for the customer experience. Assuming that's where you can sort of make money, I would target those types of functions.
So how would you treat the 3 different filings for the subsystem versus the whole system? How would you go about making that decision, other than money?
So to me, it seems like the subsystems will be sort of independent, sort of a little bit of independent claims, and the whole system would be like dependent on, your ownership of the claims in the subsystem. So I would first go with the subsystems first, I think.
So you're doing an awesome job, and what I wanted was for you to struggle with it, and you did. But I think you did a great job of pointing out some of the factors that kind of go into this. I didn't specifically use the word synergy, but that's clearly what's going on in that first phrase. If the system has some kind of interesting synergy between those different subsystems, then maybe there's something interesting about the system as a whole. But if you could swap out one of those subsystems for something else and it would work just fine, then there's probably nothing all that interesting about that system level. If those subsystems could be used with other ones, again, then I'd probably go after those individually. But if there's some great synergy between those subsystems, then maybe it makes sense to go after the combination of them. But another factor here is that could they be used on their own? Could you envision one without the other? Or one with something different? And if the answer is yes, then I wouldn't rush to have a filing of both of them together. We did this for Accuray, which was acquired by Becton Dickinson for $200 million a few years ago. And we filed on the different subsystems. There's an optical system, there was a fluidic system, there was a great digital processing that was happening. It's a flow cytometer. And I remember in early due diligence when they're raising Series A and Series B that some investors were saying, look, where's the one patent that covers everything? And that's what they wanted to see, was this omnibus patent that covered everything. And I had to push back a little bit because I didn't have anything else. We didn't file an omnibus one. And the reason that we hadn't was because there really wasn't any synergy between these subsystems. There were subsystems that were very unique, but they didn't interact with each other in a way that wasn't different than interacting with a different subsystem. And so if we were to file a patent application claiming these 3 subsystems, then a competitor would just pick 2 out of the 3 and replace the 3rd and get around that entire patent. And so we didn't go after that one. We also didn't go after it because it wasn't quite clear like what we had, because we were doing all these subsystems development for a few years until we actually ended up with the product, the C6, much later. And by then we couldn't go after the system even if we wanted to, because we had filed on the individual subsystems and those things had now published. And our own prior art was actually, our own patent applications were going to start to be used against us. Had we just gone after the system, though, that had all of these subsystems in it, the flow cytometer as a whole, there wasn't anything all that interesting at a high level. We were using pumps, and we were using lasers, and we're using digital signal processing. What was that particular system has been around for 20 years. But where we were innovating was in each of the subsystems. And we brought this like something that was about as big as this entire podium down to something that looked like a small printer that goes on your desk. That was a hard decision on where to file, whether at the system level or subsystem level. Some of that also included cost. Sometimes startups want to have more patent applications because their patent portfolio looks bigger for investors. The problem with bigger and more is this. Which of those subsystems do you take foreign? And so sometimes we actually do both. We'll file patent applications on the subsystem and patent applications on the system at more or less the same time. And sometimes they even share a lot of the detailed description. It doesn't cost a heck of a lot more to file 2 different patent applications that cover just about the same system. So you can envision something, this overarching system, this overarching patent that's now like 50, 60 pages long, maybe it's 90 pages long, and it talks about the one subsystem and the other and the other. And you could actually take this one detailed description and file it in the United States 4 different ways. You have claims that just go after this, and claims that just go after this, and claims that just go after this, and maybe another claim that goes after the combination of these 3 things, effectively this larger circle that I probably should have pointed to. That we would never charge like 16 times 4, because it's really just 2, maybe 3 patent applications worth that we created there. And we would kind of throw in that 4th one just for free. Or maybe it would cost $600 because that's what the government fees cost.
If there's a typical amount with your clients with respect to IP strategy, do some of them say, you do whatever you want, I don't want to care about it, and others are very picky and have very strong opinions into
we see the entire spectrum. Some have seen a couple of patent applications or read a few and they think they know a lot, and those are somewhat painful clients to work with. The clients that come through this class, honestly, are some of the best clients to work with because they actually have a decent amount of knowledge, but they know that there's a whole bunch that they don't know. So it's actually the ones that know just a little bit that are the trickiest ones to work with. Or they've heard something, they worked at Microsoft, and they heard, Fortune 500 patent strategy, and it's very, very different than startup strategy. And so for us to talk to them about, we're going to file a provisional. Oh, you never file a provisional. It's a waste of time and a waste of money. You're right, for Fortune 500 companies. And so those are actually the ones that are, what I'll say, a little bit more challenging.
How much interaction do you have with investors? Or you said you had to push back with some of the investors about not patenting the whole thing. Do your clients sometimes have you attend meetings and act as a legal?
So I actually had never attended a board of directors meeting. And so that's not necessarily where I interact with investors. It's when they raise money. And so if you're raising $5 million from Sequoia, Sequoia is going to hire their own IP attorney to turn around and look at your patent portfolio and do an assessment. And I'm there to kind of defend it and say, like, this is why we did what we did. We found these things. This is why we structured the claims like we did. This is our patent strategy. And so I interact on a patent attorney to patent attorney basis. My client is the startup. Her client is the venture capital firm. Sometimes, because sometimes, and especially in a seed round, that particular investor wouldn't hire an IP attorney, but maybe they know a little bit about patent law, and so they would call and ask me questions. And so my client would effectively introduce us to be able to have that conversation around intellectual property due diligence. And so I do know a decent amount of seed stage investors, because I've been on the phone with a decent number of them. Any questions on this stuff? Yeah.
Maybe not quite really, but at which stage should a startup consider having its own patent agent rather than?
Oh, great question. So one of my first employee, actually, Jessica, she's worked at in-house at Voxano. And I think there's a certain size, when realistically, a certain budget. When you start spending maybe $250,000, maybe $500,000, $750,000, that's a heck of a lot of money to go out the door on an annual basis. And most clients don't really know how to judge the value of the IP that they're getting, the IP services that they're getting. And so to be able to have someone in-house that's managing that would be great. And so patent agents, patent attorneys are often hired at some stage along the way to be able to say, all right, now's the time that we need someone to manage the law firm that's working for us. I'd say it's when you're spending $500,000 and above on an annual basis. And that company is probably a fairly large size company, unless it's med device, and it could be a little bit smaller, just because med device IP is usually even that much more important. But I'd say when you start crossing that $400,000, $500,000 on an annual basis is where it makes sense to have own in-house. Jessica's actually doing some part-time in-house work. That was a model that I helped kind of her craft that business model. Who hasn't been called on? What's your name? Corey, I think I've called on you before, but you could go again. Has anyone truly not been called on yet? Yeah. What's your name? Roland. Might not have called on you. Corey, if there's another one, you get that one. Got it. No, in general, the entire quarter. I didn't call on that many people today. Go ahead, Roland. So your startup's been working heads down on a product for 12 months. You haven't been thinking about IP at all. You totally forgot this class, or maybe you hated this class. Your main investor says, whoa, wait a second, guys. Like, we need to patent something. And you pull your head up and you're like, well, I've been working on this. There's a ton of things here. Where do you even start?
Idea of the product. So if there's one aspect of the product that it can't do without, but the others you can do without, then it would be that one aspect. But if you're not sure in their number that are very similar, you look at the market and potential for other applications, like if it's a subsystem that can work with other products as well, or it could inhibit your competitors, then you would go with that one. But it's whatever has the most potential to appeal to a larger market, even if it's not the market that you're currently in.
What if that particular technology is potentially not patentable? That's been around for a while, but you guys have figured out a way to take some older technology and apply it to a new market by making some minor tweaks.
Well, if you can turn those tweaks, if those are significant enough to make a patent, then you can do that. Otherwise, you can tell your investor that you filed a provisional, and if they don't know what they're talking about, then they'll hopefully go away.
often those tweaks that as we take an older technology and move it into a different market that's incredibly important. But those tweaks seem kind of small. They seem kind of minor. They seem, I mean, that's by the word tweak. Like there's I'm giving it some kind of definition there. But yes, I think that those are, the way that you're thinking about it and the way that you're shifting around the factors in your head, I think you're right. This is one way that I've kind of tricked clients into thinking about the right way. And I'll ask the CEO, what are you pitching to investors? What's different about your company? We're the only ones who could do this, make these computations at this speed and with this particular accuracy. Okay, great. That's what you're pitching. That's what you're saying is really important about your particular company. And I'd turn to the CTO and say, what have you created that makes that happen? And what I'm doing here is actually trying to draw this like little Venn diagram around what is really important to the company. What we're trying to do is say, all right, this is what's really important to the CEO. I think the CEO has an idea about the vision of the company and the vision of the product, the vision of the marketplace. And this is what's really important to the CTO. We don't really want to be running around patenting inventions that are just neat. The CTOs are going to be like, wow, there's a bunch of cool things here. But that might not be all that useful, especially if you have a limited budget. So to be able to say, this is what's actually making us different in the marketplace from this kind of soft, and I often kind of put it as, all right, so we're going to bundle your product and put it in a box and put it on a shelf. And that box now has room for 3 bullet points. What are you going to put on that box? We're the only ones who could do this in the cloud, facing this with this type of security. Great. And then I would turn to the engineers and say, how did you make this happen? Another way I kind of trick them into like thinking about it correctly is I'll turn to the CTO and I say, all right, so it's almost the holidays. You're going back home. You're going to be bragging, over some drinks with your friends about the technology that you've come up with over the last year. What is it that you're going to be bragging about? And that's often a proxy for, this was really hard. And I'm really excited about the fact that we came up with an elegant solution. And that's a decent proxy to, this is actually what's important to the company and really patentable. Another way that I'll trick the CEO into thinking about this, it's like, if we could stop your competitor from doing one thing, what would it be? Or if one of your top engineers were to run off to another company, what would they bring? What would be the first thing that they talk about when they reach their competitor, your competitor? And these are all ways of saying, what is the invention that we should file a patent on? But if you ask that question, most people won't know the answer to that. They'll come up with whatever technology they think is the smartest or the most novel, but that's not necessarily what we should be patenting. Something over here that the CTO is super excited about, that's super patentable, might not be what we should file a patent application on. If it's not actually deriving anything or driving anything that the CEO is particularly excited about. And so I kind of call this, right there in that meeting, trying to get this kind of trickle down from the CEO and bubbling up from the CTO. And trying to get that, what is covered by both of these. Just a few slides left. We've actually already covered this one. How much do patents cost? And I put this up on the board already. I'm not going to have you do the last group question. We're actually just about out of time. But when you're working with a patent attorney, it makes sense that they actually are working they have a technology background that matches what you're working in. You would not go to someone with a chemical background on your electrical semiconductor invention. They need to be able to be brainstorming with you and know your language. They need to know what those words mean. They need to make sure, because that's all you have at the end of the day is that claim language. I've talked about this plenty of times throughout the quarter of just the importance of working with someone that, if you are a startup, working with someone who focuses on startups. And if you are in a Fortune 500 company, focus on someone who has that experience. These two strategies are completely different and oftentimes opposite each other. In the legal background, it's an art form. Supreme Court has said this is the hardest legal document there is, period. And I trust that the Supreme Court knows what they're talking about. I've had past students turn into TAs, past students that have taken the 238 class, past students that when they start their own startup, they reach out and we've done the patent work, and if it doesn't make sense, I've given them referrals to other patent attorneys. I've started a couple companies with past students. I've had a best friend that came out of this class. Business partners, clients, all that is just a long way of saying, keep in touch. If there's something I could do to help out, please call on me. Thanks, everyone.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.